Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear us. Please do say hello in the chat if you can. It's nice to know that there are people there. And a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday evening at the Solace Festival Hearth for an hour of poetry with 4 wonderful women female poets. We have Alicia Pirmohammed, Canisia Lubrin, Helen Charman and Sandeep Parmar. Thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who are not familiar with the festival, we are an annual multi-arts festival, normally pitched in a field in June. However, you know, for obvious reasons, we couldn't host a festival this year, but we've been doing things a bit differently and are hosting our first winter event. So we've been hosting a series of events all day today, so please do check out our website to play those back and watch those. We're really thrilled to present an hour of poetry curated by Alicia Pirmohammed this evening. Alycia is a Canadian-born poet living and working in Scotland. She's recently won the prestigious Edwin Morgan Poetry Award, and her most recent pamphlet, Hinge, was published during lockdown to critical acclaim. So well done you for doing that in this crazy time. And Alycia is also the co-founder and co-director of the Scottish BAME Writers Network. So welcome, Alycia, and thank you for being here today and for curating this evening. I'll let you introduce the rest of the group and over to you.
Thank you, Faye, and thank you everyone at SOLAS. It's a real pleasure to be reading as part of the festival, and it's really exciting to be reading with some of my favorite poets as well. I think I've posted all over social media about how thrilled I am to get to read with like people who are friends and like people I admire and just amazing writers. So it's just kind of such a huge pleasure to bring writers together from different parts of the world in the session here today. We're all going to read a couple of poems, and then at the end of the hour, if there's some time, maybe have a little bit of a discussion as well. I'll read first, and then I think I'll introduce each poet right before they read, so you can keep their amazing bios fresh in your minds as they're reading. So yeah, one thing I did want to mention, and maybe we can talk about this at the end if there's time, but all 3 of the poets that are going to read for you, Helen, Sandeep, and Canisia, seem to be writing in seem to write long poems or like book length or pamphlet length poems. And I think that's something really interesting that I'd love to chat more about and talk more about and try out myself as well. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about as I've been reading their work. So I'm going to start with a couple of poems myself, and then we'll move on and share poetry from everyone else as well. So I thought I would start with a few poems from Hinge, the pamphlet that was published a little while ago, and then move on to a bit of newer work. One poem which I've not really had the chance to read out loud yet, so this would be the first time that I'm sharing it with an audience, which is really exciting. So the first poem is called Elegy with 2 Elk and a Compass. In Jasper, Alberta, I pass through the widowed poplars. Evening hikes up its dark hems. Trees begin howling their elegies when, loosened from the thicket, 2 elk walk into my gaze. Here, in the gap between needlepoint and destination, there is an unkind earth that persists even as lost petals down, leaving the poplars bare. Earlier that day, I had crossed the forest's bridges and stepped beyond its corridors. I had longed to find the hidden trail that led to the Valley of Roses. From the elk, I am expecting a lesson, as if Allah has approached me in the shape of a compass built from antler and vine. Their muscles tense. One rises into a gallop, widening the field. Its legs seized with strength, and I remain in the space left behind. The sudden nakedness of a northern forest. I am unable to follow. The elk, in their way, have mastered living by mastering letting go. Soon it will rain, and we will all wear our halos of mist. The next poem I'm going to read is called Hinge, which is also the title of my pamphlet, which is published with Ignition Press, by the way. I just wanted to give them a shout out because they've been really wonderful. So yeah. Hinge. Tonight, I am all joint and animal dark. My heel blots out the moon, vanishes the small knot of light. And yes, I prayed today, verging into my bismillah before settling on the broken. I stoop into my longings, plot a seed in every corner. Last week, I titled another page with my body and surrendered each bending, splitting line of myself to the making. When we refer to plants, we call this positive phototropism, a body rivering toward the light. I want to river toward the light, want to lean my neck toward a thing until I too become ism, scientific and named into truth. Today, I walked through a dream that wasn't mine and thought of you waiting at the end of it, as if to gather me. And maybe that's just the kind of woman I am. No matter how many times I have the moon or find myself in a room without a window, I know Allah sees everything, every hand planting something new, every metaphor for the tree it becomes. And yes, I prayed today, but planting my palms together has never felt like blossoming up the side of a mountain. The only time these hands have ever flowered, have ever been used for something good, was that spring at Yunaska, where we found a clear blue door of glacial water, and I walked right through your reflection. The fish that halved water. Dusk meets water, meets the history of my eye. I walk into the water. I walk into the shimmering body of a fish as the river's rinse and monsoon knots my memory. At the cusp of night, I learn the past is a version of this earth where few things have a name, and I glide my way through the anonymity of ghosts. This is the landmark of ruins I have become. A woman following every weaving hush and every tendril of water in search of a true story. I expected the Atlantic to show me all that ruptured when woman after locust crossed an ocean. There are too many names for canyon, and every day I hold all those distances in my mouth, all the kilometers my longing has traveled. In the middle of the night, I walk right into my dreams and cluster with the other lost sisters of the moon, our bodies fleshing out from the forests below. In the middle of the night, I walk right into a dream where the grass pickerel scissor through my every plot of land. The thing about being halved is all the loose ends will sneak up on you, whether you're slicing Zambaru or dragging a toboggan up a hill, threading in and out of the evergreens as you climb. There are too many ways to say cleave, but one day I'll split into myth and pass through the mouths of 100 generations. I am woman after spooling woman, ensorcelled by water that twins and fissures and halves into worlds. I was just thinking it's quite strange to read to no audience right in front of you. I do miss seeing the faces of people I'm reading for, but it is nice to see a couple of you at the top there. I'm going to move on to a bit of newer work now, some of which has been written this year. So I'm still getting used to reading it out loud. And this one is called Meditation While Plaiting My Hair. I part my hair straight down the middle, a river on either side. In the past, someone shaped like me poured water from a metal carafe straight into my mouth. The echo of my river submerged in your river. Lately, I read about storms all night because there is no lightning here. Instead, I see the wind pull down the tautness of trees and the swans at the lagoon part through the wreckage. Each one is another translation for love, if love was more vessel than loose thread. Once, we sat poolside outdoors in Dar es Salaam, and I chose survival over your body. Why is it I only ever see the night heron alone? I tendril neatly together my hair, soaked by salt and the wood of a body I do not touch, the spine of a book left open on the page I forgot to bookmark. The spine of a book I left out in a storm, each of its rooms sliding into our margins, into all these tendrils of blank space. And tell me, when did I let us splinter? I want the kind of permanence of a birdwatcher's catalog. At Lockend Park, swans tendril together the shape of my longing, a languid zip-line trail of water. I lean over the edge, see petals of my face thorning in the water, a Tuesday morning vase of unhurried thoughts and magenta lipstick. Any birdwatcher will tell you that winged boats do not howl through their sharp pyramid beaks. That sound clicking through waterlogged bodies must be the prosody of my own desires. I showered in the summer solstice light that morning and read my morning prayers off the cracked screen of my phone. Forgive me, as if a corner of my yearning refracted into an alternate universe, a parallel world, a symmetrical ruffled wing. I reorient myself on the path into a body turned away from its doubling, sick of my own gaze staring back. There is departure in every window, in every wind-rustled seed. Forgive me for desiring the permanence of a birdwatcher's catalog, each line of pigment an absolute, a trail of ink never slipping beyond its typeset world. And I'm going to end with a poem that's called Ars Poetica with Footnotes. Let's take this out. Ars Poetica with Footnotes. The poet says she longs for permanence. In the footnote, she finds a line in the shape of a warbler. In the footnote, she plies apart the axis of her sexuality. She is an eye, she is an ebb, a ream of wonder. Every cartographer must visit the sea. The sea is the limit of the atlas. In the footnote, she wears the language of citation. Citation is the first garden where the first tree sprouted the first brown faces of her brown ancestors. In the footnote, she writes, "How do I take up space?" In the footnote, she writes, "I want to image like you." A different ecologist named the warbler. If it were up to the poet, she would have called it tack, which has a peculiar wooden quality. In the footnote, she finds a line in the shape of a tack, the phonetic spelling of one of the sounds it makes. The poet is an ecologist as the gale is an unheard bloom. In the footnote, she attends to a body shaped like her body, a body that pours its river into her river. The poet leans across abyssal plains like wet ink. She is wing morphology. Name her after the sound she makes. And I think I will end there. Thank you for listening. So I am going to go straight into introducing our next poet, Sandeep Parmar. So Sandeep Parmar is a professor of English literature at the University of Liverpool, where she co-directs Liverpool Centre for New and International Writing. She holds a PhD from University College London and an MA in creative writing from UEA. Her books include Reading Mina Loy's Autobiographies, Myth of the Modern, an edition of the collected poems of Hope Mirrlees, and 2 books of her own poetry published by Shearsman, The Marble Orchard and Eidolon, winner of the Ledbury Forte Prize for Best Second Collection. It's an amazing collection. She also edited the second poems of Nancy Cunard. She is a BBC New Generation thinker and co-founder of the Ledbury Poetry Critics scheme for poetry critics of color. And I'm really excited that Sandeep could join us here today. Thank you, Sandeep, for coming.
Thank you so much, Alycia, and it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for your beautiful reading as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing Helen and Canisia read two poets who I also admire very much. So I am going to read from that long sequence, Eidolon, which is a poem in 50 parts. And if I have time, I might read a few poems from a new series, possibly, we'll see. But the Eidolon series is based on the myth of Helen of Troy, the Eidolon in the Homeric myth, and thereafter is a sort of way of trying to get Helen out of the difficult situation that she finds herself in, which is a kind of act of treachery. And so there's a kind of ghost double that is created and appears at Troy in her place. So this led me to think, I suppose, more about women being made sort of scapegoats of, thinking about this sort of a beguiling beauty, and all sorts of other kinds of ideas and questions. So the poem, as I say, is in 50 parts, but I'm only going to read a few from the sort of beginning and pick my way through. It was not me, but a phantom, whose oath, a variable star, mouldering in the reliquary, is doubt. I have not unsealed love, its taproot, mouthing blackness, nor seized the fairer woman to purge from her song. This hell house of primogeniture, bookish and pale, quartering what is also its own and only rule, this, fire, and the fire that comes from fire. Helen dispirited, camera-bound, Helen fetching the paper from the front lawn in her dressing gown a lot of the time, and knowing when the phone will ring seconds before by the click of its current. Demi-goddess, not woman, not God, disembodied like a bowl turned over and its loaf thumping out. Helen, queen of never mind the time, of you can't run on gin for all the everlasting, and such moths, broiling airlessly in a sodium bulb. Smell of it on her front porch, lights on, home. Waking to a November morning, to pins running across a yardage of wool, or headaches, the circular world disfigured by food. Corn cobs in the sink gleam like teeth up her spine. Hurry up the bus goes, and its déshabillement goes, loaming on after it. I do not insist that we retain the old names. I would know you, ever light as the seed. Marketing the day-long détente for a sliver of profit does not appear to bother the kingdom of saints. ascetics her brothers, Spartans, whose only god is, insert here the death of 11 days. Wash the man by the road who turns and seeing or not seeing is soundless animal. Wash him, he is your brother. Enter his encampment of fuel-scarred fabrics and listen to his black pronouncements void of exhaust. Scramble up the highway's escarpment in violet good. Wash him or be without brothers. Helen denuded, Helen, a place of pallor where silk shrinks around her throat, exits the office, mindless, purposeless, walking into and out of, through and over, up and around, into and out of, hands waving, mindless purpose, metal tint to everything, Stesichoros blinded for watching her cross the street, outside and into the car, horn blaring. US national interests. Matters of vital interest to the United States to include national security, public safety, national economic security, the safe and reliable functioning of critical infrastructure, and the availability of key resources. PPD, Presidential Policy Directive 20, top secret. It has, of course, occurred to me that this conversation is being recorded, but what you say does not anyway belong to me. The 1913 Local Prosecutor Training Manual warns no Jews, Negroes, Dagos, Mexicans, or a member of any minority race on a jury, no matter how rich or well educated. The 1986 manual warns against those with multiple gold chains or free thinkers. As a wheel on its axis turns, this book unwitting to itself around the idea of thee, Whitman. Helen of Sparta, of Troy in Egypt, of no known address, of no known nationality, refugee of no known conflict, stateless, without property, disappearing under a veil of treason. I am not the Virgin Mother, lamenting in the hills above Ephesus. I am the invective, injuring these dry plains studded with stone pines. I am the lateral commemorate of war, as the steps up to my hiding place suggest. I am the birther of sacrifice, received back into the earth, heavenly rock face. If you knew my real name, you would not use it so lightly. An idea is not a woman, but many women the composite of an idea. Ours is an older civilization, remade dramatis personae, recast by different troops, rebuilt in the style of Ionian capitals and fluted pilasters, put through the ringer of the magisterium. We see the real Helen is the false we, is the Eidolon. Helen as a beam of moonlight, caught sideways. Helen refracted onto thresholds, her reflection a holy cult of high-born women ululating in bedrooms, gripping the mirror hard that bears her standard, Helen with beauty like a tightened bow. The window clapping shut like an iron gate. She does the latch, empty, diffuse glow. Now focus on her lithe and loathed silhouette. See if it makes plain how a woman could be mistaken by so many men for a ghost, bartered dead by nudist song, even in this unacknowledged light, at this impossible angle. I'm just going to read 3 poems from it, and a series I haven't read from before, really, and it's based on Goethe's Faust, which has been a kind of fascination of mine for some time, possibly partly because in one part of it, he marries Helen of Troy. So I've gone through Helen to find one of her most unsuitable lovers. And so Faust is a kind of fascinating figure, but he's also a way for me to think about the immigrant striving. So I'm just going to read 3 of these. And the second one I'm going to read is partly for the poet Banu Capel, whose presence on a walk inspired that particular sequence. I'd be but a shadow, seed of clay, turned earth, blown onto the path of shadow. Want or indigence, debt or shame, sisters of distress, whose midnight phone calls light the bedside lamps. You take the coverlet with you to the next room, care, sister of death, whose grief is not an abstraction, but an inheritance waiting for another dawn, a being with sisters, sageless arrows of grief. We rain down our fury. The devil whistles while he works. I am the 5th sister, whose striving lays an ocean between the shadows of our dead, quarreling shores a great distance apart. Here is your image, a swan unfolding its wings, a river of blood down its back, its beak preening at arterial speed, red feathers foaming, unstopping flow. We cross a mudded field of apple trees, in its dwindling harvest, a circle of blonde heads, murmurous clutching arms, crouched webwork of ground. What magic is this? A conspiracy of daughters, casting in daylight, red and white, making sacrifice of abject girlhood. How have we come to be here, sister? The autumn banks, the exile of a grass-laid river. We see the flatterer coming up the path through a single eye. We sisters, monsters gray from birth, keeping counsel in our cave. We graceless Graiae, kin to Gorgon's fates. We Phorcides, who pass between us one eye, one sharp tooth. We who cannot see the devil all at once, but know his many guises. He, the procurer of certificates. He, the forger of passports. He who is paid only in cash. He, a forgetter of faces. He, a registrar, a bursar, bank manager, a purser, a pilot, border patrol officer, a suitor, a celebrant, senior doctor. Scatter yourselves over the earth, he ordered. Go at once, you seedless women, you beasts. So I have taken the eye and left you our shared tooth. What I have seen, dear sister, if you can name yourself, no riddle will remain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. That was an incredible reading. I was just thinking how I've read Eidolon so many times, but I don't think I've actually heard you read it. And that's the first time I've heard you actually read it out loud at a reading, which is such a privilege. And I really loved the new poems that you read out loud as well. Is that going to be a longer series too then? Is that what you're thinking? Oh, sorry.
Yes, it will be. Yeah. It's perfect to be as long as Eidolon. So yeah, thank you. That's really kind.
That's amazing. I can't wait. I'm very excited for that. So next, I will introduce Helen Charman. Helen is a writer and academic based in Glasgow. Her second pamphlet, Daddy Poem, was shortlisted for the 2019 Ivan Juritz Prize. Her latest, In the Pleasure Dairy, is published by Sad Press. Her first nonfiction book, Mother States, is forthcoming from Alan Lane, and I'm very excited to read that. I love reading your nonfiction work as well, Helen. She teaches English literature at Durham University and is an associate member of staff at Camberwell College of Arts and the Glasgow School of Art. As resident commissioning editor at Map magazine, she is running the year-long TENANCY project. And I think we're very lucky to have Helen here today.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching, but also thank you Alicia and Sandeep for your readings. And Canisia, I'm so excited to hear yours. It's very exciting. Too much excitement for lockdown. It's overwhelming. I'm going to read, I'm just going to read the whole of In the Pleasure Diary today, which came out a few months ago from Sad Press with this cover, which I really love. But I haven't had a chance to read it at all yet, because like you, Alicia, it's come out during lockdown, which is weird. So it feels nice to be able to read it. And just before, like a little bit of context, a pleasure diary is a kind of architectural feature that in France and then later in England, noble women would have in their houses, where they could pretend to do dairy work. So they could pretend to churn the butter and make the cream that actual labouring women were doing in those houses in a different part, in a much less aesthetically pleasing part. So that's where the name comes from. Okay. In the Pleasure Diary. 1. Life begins. We make butter, not profits. We make butter, not profits. We make butter. Meet me again in the Pleasure Diary. For half the working weeks as good as not. Historically, the value of infant life is determined by the forces of supply and demand. Injury at birth, want of breast milk, wasting diseases, marasmus, the midwife isn't laughing, atrophy, wrong feeding, convulsions, damp atmosphere, bad weaning, maternal exhaustion. We rent the cot by the hour, debility, prematurity. In the dream, I have had a baby and the baby is asleep on my chest. The baby is asleep on my chest, and in the dream, I've had a baby. In the dream, I'm in my uniform and the customer is here again. I tell him he's missed breakfast orders by 15 minutes. He grabs me by my collar, pulls my face close, says, redacted. He wears a Ralph Lauren gilet. 2. Image, earth. Qualities, weak, yielding, dark, nurturing, responsive, receptive, adaptable, submissive, charitable, protective, even-tempered, frugal, fertile. Direction, southwest. Family member, mother, body part, belly, season, early autumn, time of day, night, animal, cow, color, black, element, soil. Cloth, kettle, pregnancy, level, balanced, impartial, large wagon, form, ornament, multitude, tree trunk, shaft. The stepmother just doesn't understand what it means when people say abolish the family. 3. Looking a gift horse in the mouth. I have borne myself till I became unbearable to myself. Christina Rossetti's last Valentine sits, sticky, propped up against the vinegar. Salt's funny, it shrinks in the potato's mouth like a memory. What memory? Christina Rossetti stuffs the baby back inside her. Up the hill you think you are, Christina Rossetti. After 2 pints of cider, Christina Rossetti stuffs the baby back inside her. Up the hill, in the park, you're a miserable little sinner. There is never any reason for suffering. Eat up your own insides, little pet, parasite, what worm, 2 liters of white lightning, thinking about becoming a nun, sitting down, being sick, looking for rabbits, and that Playboy spread themed around Goblin Market. The stepmother works in finance. She asks you pointed questions at barbecues about your job prospects. 4. I read the tea leaves, but the answer's still escaping me. Where do I put myself if public life's destroyed? Too much, no give. I have to say I didn't consider your response to my Instagram story a commission as such. Question, isn't there just something about Greta Gerwig? Answer, her studied insouciance, eating those pickles in bed. Question, isn't there just something about the phrenologist's head. Answer, sobbing on my hands and knees, desperate to live. Your sister's wedding? No, it literally looked amazing. A sealed jar of pickles so big I thought they'd heal me or something. Ha ha, press send, kiss, kiss. Our stepmother believes in the rationalism of meritocracy. It is possible still to carve a home for yourself in a thick ball of blind money. 5, the economic problem of masochism. Really bad news, there's a parental view of fate. Fringor graduator, best friend, do your worst, as the little wretch sits on a fence made of hard slaps and severed ring fingers. Women are machines for suffering. That's why your nice sketch hangs flush above a bent back picking litter. Not so much did you hurt her as with such force, how many times? Cloth, kettle, pregnancy, level, balanced, impartial, large wagon, form, ornament, multitude, tree trunk, shaft. In the dream, I am in charge of a machine that inputs the data from every successful planting of a rowan tree in the country, charting trunk health, root growth, leaf mass, berry harvest from every healthy year. And so, because you love me and because I love you, mother, I have woven a wreath. Our stepmother wants to remind you, if you want to stay in London, you'll have to find a way to pay your rent again. 6. Poem against landlords. Like that will do anything. Loved your tweets about Jarl's Wood, loved your tweets about the ice shelf melt, loved your tweets about the thinning of the cryosphere, big ice shelf energy. Where does a year go? Carefully void your contract, fill all available drains with butter. 9 nights alone. Of rhymes wherewith to crown your honoured name, in you not 80 years can dim the flame. Our stepmother hangs her wedding photos on A1 canvases in the hallway. There is no shame in the vindictiveness of youth. Release the doves. They fly as low as the ugly. 7. Any vile witch. Disgrace and miserable wanderings, or your 20s, ha, ha, precarity, or the gradual erasure of the possibly normal family. Who was it that you loved? Spider under the dirty glasses, bitter swelling under the sweat-felted arm, disgrace, or the city you choose has thick air that is poisoning you. Where was my love? I left it on the farm. Of love, whose blessed glow transcends the laws of time and change and mortal life and death. Our stepmother frowns, folds her hands, says, that's a bit radical, isn't it? Our stepmother goes through your drawers, your special box of precious things. They seemed to her useless. She throws them out. My cloth, my kettle, my pregnancy, my large wagon, my form, my ornament, my many multitudes, my tree trunk, my shaft. In the dream, I wake and walk across the frozen fields to see the clothes made by Grace and her sisters, to see the way they fastened the necks of their blouses with locks of hair. It's Christmas. I flee the house and the family. I know with certainty that the whole village is sharing the news as the sun breaks over the rakes of the trees, that nobody believes that I've been raped. That child came neither from a wet nurse's breast or from a distant udder. Oh, virtuous mother. Oh, Mater Dolorosa. To want the butter and to want to have the money for the butter. To want the butter and to want to have the money for the butter. To want the butter and to want to have the money for the butter. To want the butter and to want to have the money for the butter, to want the butter, and to want to have the money for the butter, to want the butter, and to have the money for the butter, to want the butter, and to want to have the money for the butter, to want the butter, and to want to have the money for the butter, to have, to want to have, to want to have, to want. 8. Economic concerns become a glass-like structure. Consistency in missed football games, in other aspects I can no longer be bothered to list, in financial attention, in domestic support. With regard to your own concerns, I cannot accuse you of being anything other than completely true, of remaining in your own way devout. Now, grimly lit, palliative, reproachful wallet out. You give air freely to your own abandonment grievances. You don't even sound like me. Well, if I did, I'd rip my own tongue out. Children, singing tunelessly. Oh, see the rowan berry, it's hanging from the trees. Oh, see the red it bears me, nestled in its leaves. Oh, see the rowan berry, bringing fruit, bringing peace. The mother strokes your hair and says, try not to worry, or to pull a succession of larger and larger worries from your big bag. Come on, do the anxious hand. Breathe with me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Helen. There's just so many things going through my head right now. First, I'm so glad that you were able to read the whole pamphlet. It was absolutely mesmerizing. Your reading of it was so amazing. And did you say this was sorry, you don't have to unmute if you've already muted, but this was like the first time that you read the whole thing out as in a reading? That's so cool. I'm really glad that we could be here to share that with you. And thank you for sharing that with us as well. It was amazing read out loud, really great. And I was also, just to mention to anybody listening, you had an essay about the pleasure dairy in Poetry Review as well. And I remember reading that and like learning a bit more of the context, and it was just like also made the reading here very powerful as well to know that context. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And hopefully after, I don't know, after lockdown or whatever that means, you'll have lots of chances to read it in person as well, with a lot of other people too. Okay, so our next reader is Canisia Lubrin, who is joining us from Canada. Is it Ontario? Yeah, Ontario, Canada.
Ontario.
Yeah, which is so cool. I'm so glad that we could all get together from all these different parts of the UK, but also of the world. And I think it's just really lovely to have us all here reading together. So writer, critic, editor, and teacher Canisia Lubrin grew up in St. Lucia, one of my favorite places in the world. She studied at York University and earned an MFA at the University of Guelph. Lubrin is the author of the poetry collections The Disgraphist, her most recent collection, and Voodoo Hypothesis, which really just changed my world when I read that collection. It's wonderful. And which is also named a CBC Best Poetry Book and shortlisted for the Raymond Schuster Award. Lubrin was a 2019 writer in residence at Queen's University and has taught in the English department at Humber College. She has worked as an arts administrator and a community advocate for nearly 20 years. Thank you for joining us, Canisia.
Thank you. Thank you, Alycia. Hello to everyone from wherever you are joining us in the world. Thank you also to Solas for making this afternoon possible. It's afternoon for me, probably night for you already. I think this is the first time I have been surrounded by doctor poets, you know, so this is cool. It's nice to be here. Sandeep, Helen, Alycia, thank you so much for your wonder-filled readings just now. And so I will join you in your chorus and read from The Disgraphist, which was also published in lockdown. And I am very thankful that, it's such a great luck that this book has gone out and met so many people. And so this is in gratitude. The Dysgraphist investigates selfhood, kinship, language in a world such as the one we have. And certainly for me, my particularity is the lens through which I am viewing, a world which is anti-Black, which is the result of modernity and particular histories. And so the persona Jejun speaks through a dramatis personae, which is made up of a cornucopia of I's, first person I, second person I, third person I. And so hopefully you can follow through here. It's in the form of a 7-act play of a kind. Is it not enough to enter ending oneself in the halving road, and the fires in us blot the coasts that reject us, and we sugar the desert we screed, frantic for fullness, if fragile, if symbols, if nothingness, at first a doubt escalating our verbings, if still ourselves, a thing to become, past wavering interests in peace, given only for spilling. Recall that face, which is no face, a craved choice, eureka in someone's drawn God, I and the next could praise now, if I were not set ablaze enough. If that morning I hadn't the thirst to lean into the world with an ear to a mouth, begging for the happened thing, for something disguised. What could prove this dust is freshly mouthed, not some cyclic, newly vaporized empire, settling its faithless wages. Eyes masses, these bent backs, enough. I pulls off eyes' toes and leaves them near the sea. Eyes see, back to the sea as before, yet an hour's drift from Manzanilla, which is no place, but a word I loves. I knows what begins the act of saying things, what is lodged there, a promise of some life, not unlike this coal gray sky, not unlike the not good marching band a street away, throwing madness out with eyes' lonely discography. I says, please, without toes. But what about these feet, now that they are not seized in their act of marking things, disappeared things, things given over to the gesture, the method, the field awash and undertow? What is love but the hand returning to claim the dust red, white, black as a cold-swept evening? Like the dinosaurs, yes, those who heard the waves, but seeing nothing in the darkness, not yet anyone swallowed into the 24-hour clock. Here, you and I both hear this, and you find in I nothing you want. Nothing that can be easy with I as a starting point, as you then cast I to chronicle, to scrub words into timesheets. Call I the narrator, but wanting nothing of the enzyme, turning speech into carcinogen, the minute air meets it in the mouth. A half-headed thing, remembering to hoof the human, a last act of self-preservation, undying fiction. Something began in precurse, formless, as though hungered for mutant offerings. I's people, to victors with names like Somerset. But what about Jejun? Jejun has known I. They were children once. Children holding their heads up at the aquarium of ill-conceived enterprise. Let that be all you need to know. The dysgraphist must lend the mouth to the flood of oil beneath the Gulf of Mexico. Their waves doing their best to save us from America, the premonition of coins, given plumage, red, jaune, bleu et orange, the children who know their job, know to never be done with answering the unanswerable. Dis-nous qu'il est qu'il a, to never raise a hand or shield themselves against some agent of decay. Lithographic forms of having to commit to the speaking, bluer than perpetual lines of black tears you meet I, now the elder one, wanting a haunting with jejune. Though all of that is too much to ask. Calling I to walk out of the sea. All of the world hears the surf supply applause, hears jejune swimming in, jejune outlawed in the notes of 50 generations, far from that door of even more unopenings. How to pay for the vocal injury I feels at the end of the Gulf of Mexico. The one wrecks, seeds still in jars after a century. How the sea hacks the compass still. I feels how far is left to go, Sudan, Abaco, Aleppo, still. Before the self-same notes of dead musicians, consider I more than the pen. And to have never thought of the notes as autobio, and to have never built a better world to inhabit or break. Speaking jejune, I has screwed up, I knows it, and how to pay for it instead. I hammers the joke's humorless record with a love, a marrow, and what is marrow, if not the loss of the right to scrub vain as words clean. The work is honorless, preoccupied with definition. The work is always to understand, of course. Why else the brain? Why else the heart sending blood upward? Why else here and everywhere, everything still erupting and unsayable? Jejune knows it is other people who cry out on the news, who risk loam on life on treacherous waters, a homing, to spread the years on a couch and be caught in a comforting web of verdict. Later, Jejune leaves her eyes with a letter that they be laid down on pillowed pills. Dear suicide, dear vex, dear sex, two-minded, something better fissure, mutely. So when they find the eyes and they say, look, someone's eyes are left here. Here also is a whole banana parsimony in two hands. In the mind release I as though the birds, sure to return across this distance, exposed to the sunlight, even as the bridge will be gone. Even as the mothers and all the landmarks for rest declare the mainland, the just waking fort of beasts, you are so seen, so clear, Jejune, given to I before a court. Jejune understands the signature will wipe I out. I, as the tobaccoed air, the tongue-tied heaviness of striking this act of permanent residence with debris given to the children who ripen to vitamin loss, somewhere far off from Malawi. From Manzanilla. Who else is a mothering anagram, Jejune? Who keeps the cloth rough to investigate its lure of an origin? Does I bring more than that, Jejune? Say the bulk of broken bones between these hands that cannot mend them. Yet it can't be that. No line is so straight. It mustn't be the years, scribbled on already, turning against that child illiquid with touch, into something of a personhood, nothing worse. What is some faith in neurons, in the intangible quarrels of having and letting, in I's gray mood, to have not sung need, common soil, to have needed the abacus gouging the arteries of a dead heart, careful to take its holes, its chambered script for whole notations, whose words make a return to the call of man o' war, doved through a clogful age. Can you reach Jejun between the small hour and the gathering, and pluck I out before duel to the death? Is that not why you came, Jejun? Are all of these words asleep this century anyway? Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Canisia. Thank you so much. I didn't want you to stop reading. Actually, I was so pulled into the world that exists in your collection. Thank you so much for reading from it. I think when I was promoting this event, I had said something like, the work that you guys write remind me why I love poetry so much. And hearing these readings have also just made me like remember again, like how much I love writing poetry, how much I love listening to poetry, which I think is something I kind of have found harder to remember sometimes during lockdown when I'm not going to as many readings. But yeah, I wish I want to take a class with you. Canisia. One of your writing classes. It was so incredible.
You don't need it.
I would love to though, but yeah, yeah, thank you so much for reading. I love that collection so much. Yeah, thank you. And we're kind of coming to the end of our event, but I hope you guys don't mind. I think it'd be such a shame if like we kind of ended it without you getting a chance to talk a little bit to each other. So maybe just returning to that first sort of comment that I made about how, and you've all read from your long kind of poem series as well, so it kind of ties in nicely. But if you might, either like all of you or just a couple of you, if you want to kind of speak about what draws you to the long sequence poem or like kind of the narrative poem. And what you think it's offered you as a poet, and why you're drawn to that style, and yeah, and just what that's just writing in that style and kind of speaking about why you've chosen that form, and then we can kind of close off there after that.
I feel like I just talked. Someone else want to?
I haven't yet written that style of poem, but I definitely, after like being in this reading, I think I want to try, and after reading your works as well.
I guess one thing I would say, it's not answering it for myself, but just the pleasure of listening to the long poems that Helen and Canisia have read, and obviously having read them on the page as well. I think what the advantages are of long poems is, I guess, maybe more what draws us to them than perhaps the sort of shorter lyric poems. And it has never felt like a good time to write short poems, and now feels like an especially bad time. There's so much that can be developed in terms of voice, or a multiplicity of voices, as in both of these as examples. And just the kind of, I guess, developing a kind of argument or developing the depth of ideas, I think, that are in both of both Helen and Canisia's books, or pamphlets rather. Would be really hard to do. But I guess there's also an episodic nature too. I mean, I suppose I say that a bit more in Helen's, perhaps, where there's a kind of very quick shifting too, back and forth. So you could see them as being, and maybe to an extent, I guess, with my own poem too, that, what is a long poem? What does it really constitute? How is it different than a collection of poems that are just interconnected in some way? Are all of our poems just a kind of long poem that we're going to finish when we're dead? I'm going to stop there. Like this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think of I write short lyric poems, but I do think there is kind of, even still, like you said, like a narrative across all of the things that I write, and that kind of threads them together, whether I'm calling it like a long poem or not. I think there is a character that I'm developing in them, even in those short pieces as well. So that's really, that makes total sense to me. But yeah, Don't feel like you have to answer that question. It was just something I was thinking about as I was like kind of just revisiting your works in anticipation of this reading. But did either of you want to mention anything? Or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and certainly, I think there's a sense, you know, of the long poem. Which, I mean, this is my first kind of book-length poem. For me, there's a sense of working in a kind of elongated rhythm that allows me to think in a different kind of way, to give different textures to the thinking, and to give different textures to the sound, that I can make in a poem, you know, by shifting the tonal quality, by shifting even the nature of the narrative that one might offer a long poem, because I think poetry really does allow for us to abandon, or certainly me to abandon the rules of narrative, such that, you know, the kind of psychic space that's created in a long poem is one where narrative is both suspended and apprehended as a kind of powerful illusion, you know. And so that that way of thinking for me is both frightening and, you know, in a similar fashion, fascinating and exciting. It's doing both things. And so because I'm in this tension, you know, of working toward you know, something that's not necessarily predictable, and trying to hold the you know, the poem in a kind of long extended meditation on something, I think it's just it's a different apprehension of poetic force, you know, in a way that you can't really do with a short lyric. You know, a short lyric tends to give you this compact, you know, powerful, sonorous singularity. You know, it's a kind of here. Let's just hold you in this moment here in this one register. Of course, there are ways to shift registers and such in the short lyric, but I don't think it's as kind to that kind of exploration and improvisation, and also paying attention to repetition, you know, repetition in different ways. So I think I love the long poem. I think I love it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is something that's like that having more space, or certainly I can only speak for myself, obviously, but I feel like it allows me to think about something in a sustained way, whilst also enabling kind of the expression of ambivalence or changing my mind, or like I feel like it, and I think perhaps this is just this is just because of I get less and less sure with lyric poems. I think I used to find them easier to write because or short poems, I guess, because I felt like I had something to say. Whereas I feel like increasingly I'm just like, ugh. But it helps. I think it helps. It feels valuable to work through why you're writing at all, or what's good. Like I feel like it gives you more, or it gives me more. Yeah. I guess.
I think, yeah, I think for me, that makes sense. That makes sense to me, just because I find the long poem so intimidating. But when I think about it, it would let me then unravel that idea that I'm obsessed with, that ends up in all my poems anyway. So definitely something I think that I will be inspired. I have been inspired to try, I should say. Yeah, and Helen, with your work, there, like even when I was reading your essay, like there's just so many things that interweave between like what your academic interests are, as well, that kind of came through in your pamphlet. So I think that's some kind of where I want to move toward too, as well. So yeah, it was just really lovely to have all these incredible examples to learn from. I think I don't want to keep you all too late. I know it was meant to be an hour, so I think we could close there unless anybody has a closing comment. If Solas wants to wrap up things and let you know about what else is going on or what has gone on throughout the day. Yeah, thank you everybody for your incredible readings and your thoughts and inspiring
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was I was thinking you don't get many kind of goose pimple moments this year, and that was a real goose pimple moment for me. So thank you very much. And for everyone tuning in, please give everyone a warm clap, and if you can, whatever way you can. And please do tune back in at 9 o'clock. We've got some live music that was recorded around a campfire in Pollock Country Park, so that's exciting. And thank you very much for a wonderful, wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good day.